What's up? What's up? Hello orchid fans, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. I thought I'll do a video on how we prepare orchids for winter, or how I would do it. So as you can see, I grow all my orchids inside, on the shelves, under lights, so when we kind of step into colder weather, my orchids really can't see the difference because they don't get any contact to the outside basically. So that means that I need to kind of replicate what's going on outside in their nature, you know, in their home basically. So so I'm gonna cover 3 areas, which is light, temperature, and watering and fertilizing. So to start with light, basically where orchids grow around the equator, the intensity of the light, you know, it's sun, so obviously it's not really gonna change. One thing that changes in terms of intensity is the orchids that grow in the deciduous forests, the leaves drop off the trees, which means that the orchids would get more light because the leaves don't shade them as much. So you could even argue that, you know, they would need more light during winter, but I'm not gonna do any of that. I'm not gonna change the way the lighting is working right now because, you know, I've got LED lights. The lights are quite strong and I think that they're getting pretty good light, so they're not getting any changes in terms of intensity. However, what I can change is the length. Basically, I can change the length of the day for them because they live in a room, so as soon as the curtains are closed, they basically can't really see what's going on outside. So although our days in winter here in Scotland are quite short, you know, it could go down up to about 6 hours a day of daylight. So you know, it is quite short for orchids. You know, they're usually used to kind of 11 to 13 hour light a day. So it's, you know, they wouldn't like to have a 6 hour day length. So that's what I've already started doing. I've got all my lights are on the timer, so I can, you know, change the timer depending on the time of the year. So during summer, my lights were on for about 13.5 hours, and I started reducing that slightly. So I reduced it to 13 hours maybe about a month ago, and then a few weeks ago I took it down even more to about 12.5 hours, and I'm thinking to take it down even more, probably to 12 hours and then to 11.5 hours. So I will switch my timers probably in the next few days to 12 hours, and then I'll do 11.5 hours maybe in about a month's time. And then really from kind of mid-January, I will start switching it back up. So, you know, we'll go back to 12 hours mid-January, and then back to about 12.5 hours, maybe towards the end of January, mid-February. So they will go back up after New Year. And I don't want to go too low either. I think 11.5 is more than enough. So they will get that kind of you know, shorter days, longer nights difference. And the way I do it, I usually take off 15 minutes in the morning when the lights come on, and then I take off 15 minutes when the lights switch off. So they basically just switch on 15 minutes later and switch off 15 minutes earlier. That gives me like half an hour difference basically in the day. And I mean, I don't know, so far so good. So that's what I'm doing with lighting. And the other aspect is temperature. Now, during winter, obviously the heating is on, and although this room is not getting any heating, I switched the radiator off altogether. The heat still comes through from the rest of the house, and it's a pretty small room, so it kind of warms up fairly quickly. So there's not really much I can do with that. I can't really keep my windows open because it's too cold outside. So if I let cold air in, it's just going to be way too cold. I mean, on my windowsills, you can see there are a few orchids over here. It is still slightly cooler on the windowsill compared to the shelf, and my cooler growers are living on the windowsill at the moment. That cherry baby over there is really more just for display. It doesn't really live here normally, but look at those blooms, they're amazing. So what else I can do in terms of the temperature is my orchids, they get a lot of heat from these lamps. So when these lamps are on, the upside of the shelf heats up the orchids. So these pots are usually quite warm. So my plan was, and I was thinking about this for quite a long time to try and figure out what I could do to kind of reduce the temperature of the pots, basically, because, you know, I can't keep the lights off, so they have to be on. So the only thing for me to do is kind of lift the orchids up from the shelf, and I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I think I finally did. And what I'll do is, you can see that my majority of my orchids are in these plastic containers, so this bright pink container, and I've got quite a lot of these. So what I'll do is I will just put this in another container like that, which basically will give me an air gap in between, which basically means that the orchid is not gonna sit directly on the heat, you know, on the lamp. So I mean, they don't sit directly on the lamp, you know, I mean, there is obviously, these are wire shelves, and there is a cover here as well, so they don't sit directly on the lamp, but still there is quite a lot of heat coming through. But I'm thinking if I put that inside of another of this of these plastic containers, then that will create an air gap, which means that the spot shouldn't really heat up as much anymore. So I'll give it a go and see if it works. I mean, the bottom of this basket, for example, is quite warm, so it provides, you know, a lot of heat to the orchid, and I think that should give me enough of a kind of temperature drop in the pot to tell the orchids that the winter is coming. That's what I'm going to do in terms of temperature, and at the end of the winter we can come back and have a look at how my orchids have kind of survived the winter, and, you know, whether it was enough or, you know, they hated it, and we can, you know, reflect on it and see what worked and what didn't work. So the third area I wanted to cover is watering and fertilizing. Now, you will know that there are a few orchids that like what a lot of people call winter rest. So dendrobiums, for example, a lot of dendrobiums like winter rest, and I think there is a bit of a kind of misconception on what that means, and also when to move the orchid into winter rest. And, you know, I'm not an expert, so I'm just trying things out myself, but the way I look at it is, if the orchid is in active growth, then I'm not gonna cut water and fertilizer on it, you know, on 1st of November, because that's the date, you know, I'm not gonna do it. The way I water and fertilize my orchids in general, I know I promised I'll do a video on it, but this time I'm definitely gonna do it pretty soon. But I basically water my orchids 3 times a week, and that sounds probably like a huge chore, but it really isn't, because it takes me 10-15 minutes to water my orchids, so it's really not a big deal. And although I'm not really changing much in the way I'm watering my orchids, the orchids are gonna get quite a big change anyway. So let me explain what I mean by that. So when I go through my orchids and when I water them all, I go through every single pot, and if there is water still left in the container. So when I water my orchids, I usually leave a little bit of water at the bottom of the container. And if 2 or 3 days later I come back and there is still water left in the container, then I would empty that container and not water this orchid, you know, today, for example. So I would just let it dry out, and then when I come back to water this orchid 2 days later, it hopefully dried up as much as possible. So when it gets another dose of water, you know, it had a bit of a kind of dry spell. And if the orchid has dried up, then I will water it. Now, in terms of what do I water it with? So I usually mix up about 250 parts per million of fertilizer in my sprayer, and when I'm about a quarter of the sprayer of water is left in the sprayer, I then top it up with plain water, which basically means I dilute that quarter of, you know, water left of 250 parts per million. I dilute it even more, and it becomes probably, you know, 50 parts per million, and then I use that to water my kind of low feeders or orchids that don't really grow at the moment. So, and that's how they get this change, because I started noticing that more and more orchids are not using up their water anymore. So it means that they're not really getting watered every 2-3 days. They only get watered maybe every 4 to every 7 days, and that's how they get the change. You know, I always water every orchid depending on what it needs on that watering day. So I will check every single orchid in my collection, but it doesn't mean that I will definitely water every single one. I might, you know, just pour the water, the leftover water, out of the pot and just leave it and let it dry out, and then, you know, it just won't get any water. Whereas the orchids that have used up all the water from the previous watering, they will get more. And, you know, talking about the Vinterest, let me show you one example. This is one of my newer additions. I got this as a present, and this is Dendrobium berryoda. And as a dendrobium, and specifically berryodas, they usually like to have Vinterest. And, you know, some people would completely stop watering their orchids for the whole winter and give them kind of like a cool down, you know, which I'm gonna struggle to do, so we'll see how my orchids go. This guy is already growing at 2 new growths, if I can sort out the lighting. So 2 new growths already pushing out. It's got flower spikes coming out of every growth that it's got. So I've got I've got 2 flower spikes in here, which the lighting is not the best here to show you, but there is 2 flower spikes here. I've got 2 flower spikes on this middle smallest growth as well, pushing out. And I've got also 2 flower spikes from this growth. So there's one in the apex and one behind the second leaf down. The root system is absolutely going nuts in here. So many grow tips. I'm trying to figure out, oh, here we go, that's a bit better. So a lot of growing tips. It's filled up its pot. So for me now to push this orchid into Vinterest, I don't think it makes sense, because these new growths, they will probably abort, you know, if I stop feeding it and stop giving it any water. So I can't really push this orchid into dormancy, or, you know, into kind of cooler Vinterest. So I'm just gonna keep watering and feeding it and see what happens. You know, these 2 new growths are looking good so far, so it's in active growth. So, you know, it's maybe getting a little bit confused of what time of year it is just now, and that's okay. You know, I don't mind it growing more and growing actively. So that's this one. So I guess that's it for this video. Let me guys know how you grow your orchids. You know, it really depends, doesn't it, how you grow your orchids. Do you grow them outside? Do you grow them inside? You know, how much change can you actually make? Yeah, we'll see how this goes, and, you know, when winter is over, we can come back and look at this and at the orchids and kind of reflect back on what I said in this video, how I'm looking after the orchids, and or you know, maybe I'm gonna be changing something in the middle of the winter, or you know, I will update you after the winter is gone and we can have a look at some orchids and how they're doing. And yeah, we'll see if this if all these changes are gonna make any difference. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please give a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe to my channel for more videos. It helps me out a lot, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.